This program proudly brought to you by SGIO, the human face of insurance.
Tonight's edition of Eyewitness News is proudly brought to you by the fully imported Bluebird from the new Nissan.
This is 10 Eyewitness News with Anne Fulwood.
Going round in circles, two Green senators accused of being confused over their budget demands. Australia's social hangover, a new report reveals the extent of underage drinking. And the cola promotion that went pop, Pepsi's billion-dollar nightmare. Good evening. It's now feared at least 5,000 people have died in an earthquake in India. The quake, measuring 6.4 on the Richter scale, struck western Maharashtra state just before dawn. A massive rescue operation is underway, and according to Dilip Pangokar from the Times of India, the death toll is likely to rise.
The only hope is that the earthquake devastated rural parts of Maharashtra, where the population is sparsely distributed. That is the only hope. But otherwise, already people are calling it darkness at dawn. The rescuers are very well equipped because they've been able to get the medicines and the food from the nearby towns of Sholapur, Pune, Nasik, etc. They're clearing the dead. They're taking people to hospitals. The hospitals are jam-packed everywhere. They're providing first aid. They're providing medical succor, and they're providing for food.
Here, the federal government's budget problems have worsened, with ministers raising the possibility of another election in the face of threatened political suicide by the Green senators. While no one's taking the threat seriously, they do indicate mounting frustration for the government.
The two Green senators are frustrating all the political parties with their lack of direction on the budget.
Well, I don't think you can rely on the two Greens for too much.
It's pretty hard to know what they're going to do, because the story changes, not daily, I wouldn't make that sort of accusation, but certainly weekly.
Overnight, Senator Dima Getz admitted the Greens would risk self-destruction by forcing an election that they'd lose.
Would consider taking the steps which may seem in other people's eyes to be political suicide. Now, I can't tell you when that will be or if it will be, but we reserve the right.
So no matter how remote the possibility, elections are being talked about.
Look, I can't imagine this government will go to an election in current circumstances. I just could not imagine. If they do, I would love it.
And I guess if the budget were to rejected, then the government would be forced into that, would have to look at that possibility.
But the power brokers see a more realistic ending.
Most of the budget will get through. We might lose a bit here and there, but I think by and large it'll get through. So I really don't see this as a crisis situation.
As the Senate begins the long budget debate, the government is ruthlessly using the lower house to win the propaganda battle, after blaming the opposition for delaying the pre-Christmas tax cuts.
Thereby plundering the Christmas stockings of so many children around the country.
It's been one of those days for the government. Apart from the budget, it's fighting off threats of a wage blowout because of delays in introducing industrial relations reform. There's been a failed attempt to rework the wine tax. And finally, on Mabo, signs that the government is preparing to hand over native title rights to the states. Paul Smith, 10 Eyewitness News.
Prime Minister Paul Keating's plan to change our national symbols came under attack today. Monarchists say he wants to rip the guts out of our national identity, and the opposition warns he'll try to change the flag without going to a referendum.
The Prime Minister's push towards a republic now includes a change to the symbols of our national identity.
That's why I believe Australia should move towards an Australian head of state, and naturally in the course of that, all of the symbols of our national identity will change with it.
Australia has 6 national symbols: the flag, the coat of arms, the golden wattle, the opal, the green and gold colours, and Advance Australia Fair.
Look, he wants to rip the guts out of our national identity. For him, it's not a question of building on what we are, it's a question of changing this country from the ground up.
To change the flag, all that is needed is for the Prime Minister to introduce legislation into Parliament. A referendum is not required.
Well, I don't trust the Prime Minister, and my great worry is that he'll try and sneak a change through the Parliament.
The Coalition want a cast-iron guarantee from the Democrats and other minor parties in the Senate to force the government to a referendum on the issue. But for the moment, the Democrats have other symbols in their sights.
If we're going to change things like our national flag, we should be looking at our national anthem, because that has never been accepted by the Australian people.
And the Prime Minister's plan to drop all references to the Queen in the oath of citizenship was passed into law in the Senate. Now new Australians will pledge loyalty to Australia and its people. Stephanie Kennedy, 10 Eyewitness News.
Confusion over funding for the year 2000 Paralympics is over tonight. New South Wales and the federal government will go halves in funding the estimated $50 million shortfall in the staging costs.
Paralympic officials went into a meeting with Premier John Fahey after 2 days of public brawling over whether the New South Wales and federal governments had agreed to underwrite the disabled games in Sydney. The event's organisers claimed the promise was made in Monte Carlo last week by Sydney Olympic official Bob Elphinston. But following today's talks, this embarrassing back down.
I have received word from Dr. Robert Stedwood, President of the International Paralympic Committee, conveying to the Premier his apologies in which the way this whole matter has been handled.
Mr Finneran says it had all been a terrible misunderstanding over who said what, and John Fahey had this assurance for disabled athletes worried about the future of their games.
My government is 100% behind the Paralympics being conducted in Sydney.
Then he really did offer to underwrite the event.
If I get 50-50 support from the Commonwealth Government on shortfall, I'd be happy.
In Parliament, Federal Sports Minister Ros Kelly wasted no time agreeing.
I'm very pleased to announce that the federal government will provide 50% of the funding needed to meet the Paralympics projected budget shortfall.
So the Paralympic Games are back on track. Officials will now try to find corporate sponsors also willing to back the Games. Peter Lloyd, 10 Eyewitness News.
A disturbing new study has revealed most high school students have tried alcohol by year 10. The Australian Drug Foundation has spent 3 years gathering information on the scale of underage drinking.
The ugly face of a very public problem, teenage drinking. But although it's no secret that the problem existed, only now do we know to what extent. A study of 5,000 students throughout Australia has found that almost 50% of 15 to 16-year-olds are regular drinkers. 80% had tried alcohol, 50% had driven with a drunk driver, usually one of their parents, and 24% had experienced an unwanted sexual advance from people who had been drinking. But is it any wonder given the emphasis that the advertising media places on alcohol?
And so we can't be surprised when young people find alcohol very attractive. That's really what we're saying to schools. We don't necessarily approve of young people drinking in these ways, but we have to accept that they're going to do so because alcohol is so widespread.
And of particular concern is the danger for young women.
Of course young women are more vulnerable if faced either because they've been drinking or because they're with others who have been.
Ian McMinn, 10 Eyewitness News.
The federal government is threatening to invoke constitutional powers to force Victoria to comply with new health warnings on cigarette packets. Federal Health Minister Senator Graham Richardson has given the Victorian government 2 weeks to comply with the new labelling laws. But Premier Jeff Kennett says the tougher laws are hypocritical and hardly leave enough room on packets for brand logos. And he says Senator Richardson doesn't have the power to force the issue.
I think it just illustrates again the sort of big brother approach of the federal government. Whatever they want, they intend to get, but they're going to have to earn the right to do it.
Still to come, Michael Jackson's tour down under looking shaky, and the heroes from the crate remembered. In Moscow, the standoff outside the Russian parliament is entering its 10th day. President Yeltsin has given the rebel parliamentarians until Monday to leave the building or face the consequences. As morning broke in Moscow, police and paratroopers maintained their blockade. About 100 die-hard deputies remain inside, their phone lines, water and electricity still cut off. Meanwhile, US President Clinton has again expressed his support for the way Yeltsin has handled the crisis.
President Clinton met with the Russian foreign minister and was assured Boris Yeltsin had not imposed any deadline for resolving the standoff at the besieged parliament in Moscow.
And there's a commitment by President Yeltsin to move to a truly democratic system through truly democratic means. That's about all the United States or anyone else could ask for.
Other Western governments are also continuing to support Mr. Yeltsin.
I don't think he's put a foot wrong as far as the last few days are concerned, and therefore the kind of support that President Clinton, John Major, and all of us were giving him last week stands.
But a violent outcome could upset Russia's relationship with the West.
I think it would very much change opinion in our own country and others if there was a forceful resolution of that standoff.
Some U.S. experts say Mr. Clinton has no choice but to support Mr. Yeltsin.
We in the United States are supporting democracy, reform, the Russian-American partnership that's evolving, global stability, and a peaceful solution.
But others argue this nearly unconditional support limits U.S. options.
Because having labeled Mr. Yeltsin as a Democrat, if he acts undemocratically, then we're stuck with the results.
Despite the public show of support, many administration officials remain deeply worried, especially because of the large number of weapons on both sides. They point out it takes just one hothead to start shooting.
Peace in Bosnia appears further away than ever tonight. The Muslim-dominated parliament has voted to conditionally accept the Geneva peace plan, but it also demanded the return of territory seized by force. But the Serbs and Croats are unlikely to make any concessions.
The war never really stopped for this two-day meeting of the parliament, which considered the peace plan and rejected it. The Bosnian Army Command didn't like it as it stood. Neither did most of the MPs nor the government, because they said it punished the war's victims.
Otherwise, we are living in jungle, and the jungle is being promoted by those who are supposed to uphold the civilized norms.
The voting wasn't even close. 4 in favor of the peace plan, 7 against, 61 demanding better terms, especially the return of territories taken by force. Shortly after the vote, 3 people, including a child, were wounded in the center of Sarajevo by Serbian mortars. This apparently a retaliation against Bosnian army cannon fire. It seemed the ceasefire was already over. Put whatever gloss on it they like, and the Bosnians are striving to keep the peace process alive. Their formula of yes but means no. The war looks like continuing into its second cruel winter.
Libya now says it needs more time before the 2 men accused of the 1988 bombing of a Pan Am flight over Lockerbie surrender. There are suggestions it could be just another stalling tactic.
It may be the big break or more of the same delays, but at a meeting with the UN Secretary General, Libya, for the first time, accepted Scotland as the site of a trial for 2 men charged in the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. The statement comes after months of questions from Libya to the US and Great Britain over conditions of a potential trial. Libya says it has received positive answers
And enough guarantees to secure a fair trial for these 2 suspects.
It's not clear how the suspects or their attorneys feel about this and how much say they will have in the matter. Libya still insists it is not up to the government to turn them over. It's a question of the suspects voluntarily surrendering. The Libyan foreign minister told CNN, quote, "I'm sure they'll do the right thing." The real driving force now, new tougher sanctions the Security Council is ready to impose on Libya, affecting oil, equipment, and financial assets. A UN official said Libya actually asked for a 3-month delay on the new sanctions at a Tuesday meeting. The Secretary General firmly declined, saying there can't be a further delay. As Libya debates what to do, the West says it is not out to destroy the government of Colonel Gaddafi.
They'll get a fair trial in the name of justice, and particularly thinking of the people, the families who lost their loved ones at Lockerbie. Let them come forward and stand trial.
A high-risk gamble for British opposition leader John Smith has paid off, with the Labor Party voting to back his union reforms. In a close vote at the party's annual conference, Mr Smith won approval to end union control over the vital area of choosing Labor's parliamentary candidates. Each member will now have 1 vote, instead of powerful unions voting for thousands of their members in one block.
But the changes I propose today are vital, absolutely central to our strategy for winning power.
15 months into his term, John Smith had risked his leadership over those changes. Michael Jackson's long-awaited tour of Australia is in doubt tonight. The Australian promoter of Jackson's Dangerous tour has been told he may be too exhausted to perform his 2 concerts in Sydney in December. Also in jeopardy are 2 Melbourne shows. It's been denied that the reason for the possible cancellation is the allegations of child sex abuse levelled against Jackson in America. It was a day to remember for some of the Australians who pulled off one of the most daring raids of World War II. Known as Z-Force, the men from the trawler Crate were honoured in a wreath-laying ceremony.
They made their way to Cranji War Memorial, where 6 members of the Crate team died in a second raid. The Crate mission was so successful, sinking and destroying 7 enemy ships, that it was repeated, but with disastrous results. Wreaths were laid to salute the bravery of the men of the second mission, codenamed Rimau.
Greater love hath no man than this, when a man lay down his life for his friends.
The men were captured and jailed, but later beheaded by the Japanese, something still a bitter memory for their colleagues.
The jailers were treating it with great humour. It's a crime, there's not much one can do about it now.
A school now stands on the site where the men were forced to kneel and meet their deaths. The group has endured a sad journey, but one thought necessary to remember courageous comrades in arms.
We're going down to the sun, and in the morning we will remember this. Lest we forget.
Pam Mackay, 10 Eyewitness News.
After the break, the cola promotion that prompted a near riot, and scientists get the big picture on the smallest creatures.
You can look at things which you've never thought you could be able to look at before.
In business news, the cost of setting up a new telecommunications network has sent Optus into the red. But as finance editor Helen McCombie reports, the company claims it will be back in the black by 1995.
Optus has been part of the Australian communications scene since January last year, when it acquired its licence. 65% of phone users now have access. Today, people in Perth were linked up via the Dial 1 system. Consumers in Adelaide were given a choice earlier this week. Darwin and Hobart are the only capitals without Optus. They'll have to wait until Telecom modernises its exchanges. But Optus today revealed it was still making losses. There'll be a profit by 1995. Optus has delivered on its promises of providing cheaper calls. Long distance and mobile phone charges have fallen by more than 20% since competition started. The company has invested more than $500 million in capital works in its first full year of operations.
It's not an easy thing to invest $1.5 billion in the first 18 months of a company's existence and believe you're going to walk away with a profit at that point in time.
Optus has delivered on its promises of providing cheaper calls. Long distance and mobile phone charges have fallen by more than 20% since competition started. The company has invested more than $500 million in capital works in its first full year of operations. Its workforce has almost tripled since the middle of last year, with around 2,500 people on the payroll. On the share market, prices firmed, helped by end-of-quarter book squaring. The All Ords up 13 points. Media stocks were strong, along with oil companies, after news of an OPEC oil quota agreement. And that's business news for tonight.
And in other finance, the Aussie dollar's on 64.2 US, 42.52 pence and 67.66 yen. Gold in London, $352.50 an ounce. The FT100 up 12 points. The Hang Seng closed the day up 125. The Nikkei was up 28. The worldwide cola promotional war has taken a new twist, with one of the combatants facing a payout of billions of dollars. In the Philippines, Pepsi Cola ran a numbers promotion which sent thousands into the streets in protest.
The mood of consumers is conspicuous anger. Hundreds of Filipinos began drinking Pepsi with every meal, searching for the bottle cap which could win them one 1 million peso prize. Instead of one, a computer error printed 800,000 winning entries with the number 349. If paid in full, Pepsi's outlay would be $52 billion. But the company refuses to pay up.
We've dealt with it as honestly and as fairly as possible. We'd like to believe that.
Pepsi did offer $20 in pesos to anyone with the 349 cap. To their horror, 500,000 flooded in, forcing the company to spend $10 million more than the original budget of $2 million. The Philippines Department of Trade has been accused of neglecting consumers' rights by accepting a Pepsi settlement of about $5,000, as some protesters claim is a bribe.
It did not reprimand Pepsi Cola, and it accepted a compromise settlement without making a judgment on whether Pepsi Cola had been remiss in its duty or not.
The scandals will not go away, and Pepsi appears to have lost the chance of being the choice of this generation of Filipinos. Sean Flannery, 10 Eyewitness News.
Still to come, all the latest weather details and Tim Webster.
Coming up in sports tonight, honours, Hawthorn and horrors.
And you should see the way I ski.
Turning to the weather now, and there were showers and rain in many parts of the country today. Of the capitals, only Adelaide had showers, the remainder were fine. But Perth had a chilly maximum, with Darwin the highest at 34 degrees. The satellite picture shows a band of clouds stretching across the middle of Australia. The synoptic chart has a strong high in the central Tasman Sea, which is slow moving, and it directs warm northerly winds across most of New South Wales. In the capitals tomorrow, only Brisbane can expect fine weather all day. Canberra has the chance of showers. Sydney could experience a late thunderstorm as well. On Saturday, it should become fine in Melbourne and Hobart. Showers and a possible thunderstorm for Adelaide. Shower Canberra, fine elsewhere. And looking further ahead to Sunday, showers are forecast for Adelaide, Hobart, Melbourne and Canberra, with a late thunderstorm in Sydney. Australian scientists are getting the big picture on some of our smallest creatures. A state-of-the-art electron microscope at Sydney's Macquarie University is producing amazing photographs of living insects, something impossible until now.
Forget about Jurassic Park, this monster's here and alive. It was captured by mistake in a unique Australian-designed electron microscope. Unlike other machines, it can scan living creatures without hurting them.
You can look at things which you've never thought you could be able to look at before.
This bull ant is about to be a guinea pig. Chilled to slow its movements, scientists are taking a very close look at it. Under the microscope, the bull ant becomes a bizarre landscape. Its eye, a whole new planet. But focusing on living creatures has its problems. They don't stay still.
That's him moving now.
And when you're dealing with something so small, even the lightest touch can be a heavy hand.
See, it's quite possible when I picked it up that I've done some damage there. You can see the pressure marks.
The microscope is one of only 4 in Australia and just 70 in the world. It's already in heavy demand from other universities and research hospitals. Guy Bevilacqua, 10 Eyewitness News.
And that's all we have time for tonight. Stay with us for Sports Tonight with Tim Webster. I'm Anne Ford. I'll be back tomorrow night. I'll see you then. Good night.
Tonight's edition of Eyewitness News was proudly brought to you by the fully imported Bluebird from the new Nissan.
In Sports Tonight, September 30, first Chrissy, now Martina, the end of a golden era.
I'm sure that I'll have my moments of sadness and, where I will cry, but hopefully I'll do good the next one.
1, 2, 3, 4. Holdens to dominate at Bathurst. Back to 2 wheels, but still a scorcher at the World Juniors. And the astonishing snowman, Glenn Plake. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Tim Webster. Tonight, the AFL Tribunal, the Hawks' new coach, cycling, sailing, insane skiing, and a whole lot more. But first, Ford's challenge for Tui's 1000 glory takes a battering at Mount Panorama. Holden has snared the top 4 grid positions on the first day of official qualifying, with Mark Scaife and Jim Richards setting the pace.
After trailing the Fords most season long, Holdens have snatched box seat supremacy. Mark Scaife heads a 4-car Holden Phalanx, his best time today of 2 minutes 13.06, a full 1.3 seconds clear of Glenn Seaton in the fastest Ford Falcon.
Well, any race car around here, you're driving to the limit all the time. At this stage, so early in the week, we really haven't sort of pushed it to the limit yet.
Larry Perkins is second quickest after a big lose. The Holden racing team is third and fourth, and anyone who's tried to keep up has suffered the consequences. There are 6 Commodores and 3 Falcons in the top 9 places. 10th has gone to Tony Longhurst's flying BMW, ahead of teammate new British touring car champion Joe Winkelhock.
It's a difficult circuit, really, and I need some more laps to learn the circuit, but I like it.
A new record pole position.